What's up, guys? 1-1 last night. Slight losses. We're still mired in this run. The Utah Jazz did not get there, obviously. I guess Golden State was actually kind of motivated in that spot. Very unfortunate. Steve Kerr actually was not there. He was actually attending, I believe, the funeral service for the assistant coach who died, which I believe was over in Serbia. So he was out there while the rest of his team was playing and winning in Utah. But I still thought it was a bad spot. That's just unfortunate. And then Texas Tech won easily, blowing out Kansas at home. So at least there was that. That was good. That line closed at like 3.5 or something. So I did pretty much get the best of it with that one. That worked out well. Moving to today, I think I kind of feel more strongly about the college basketball that I have than the other plays. I will mention that I do kind of lean against Baylor, although I'm not going to quite be able to do this one. Baylor coming off a stretch of pretty tough games where they beat Iowa State at home, continue the momentum, beat Texas Tech, who was also ranked at home. So 2 ranked teams in a row. And then they went on the road and they played really tough against Kansas. And the way they lost that game, you got to think they're in a little bit of a letdown because that game was really close. It went to the wire. Baylor missed a couple shots at the end where they're trying to tie the game back up or whatever. That's going to be tough to bounce back from coming back home, but they are facing a ranked Oklahoma team. So is that going to motivate them a little bit? I'm not totally sure. I think it is a bad spot for Baylor, though. And Oklahoma just beat Oklahoma State barely. They barely just grazed by them. They actually really just barely escaped against Oklahoma. Against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State stepped up for that rivalry game. That was a game where Oklahoma was favored by 11.5. And now Oklahoma's gotten back into the rankings just because of that. But that game, Oklahoma actually played better than the final score looks. They outshot Oklahoma State by a lot. It's just, I don't really know how the game was as close as it was, but Oklahoma State was in that game right to the end. It was a 2-point game in the final minute of the game. So maybe I do want to just fade Baylor here. Am I going to have 3 college basketball plays instead of 2? I think this is a pretty ugly spot. It's a bad spot for Baylor coming off that really tough game against Kansas. They moved up from 6 to 6.5, but Ken Palm's got Baylor, the 18th ranked team, Oklahoma, the 25th. He's only got them by 5 here. Coming off that tough win. I don't know. I don't like that the lines moved up a little bit, but I don't see the percentages on it on that one. Let me see what we got going on here. Yeah, let's add Oklahoma. I'll add Oklahoma. Why not? I'll just get really stupid with this. We'll wind up with 5 plays today. Oklahoma, 6.5, but you might be able to get 7 if you wait, actually. So maybe we should just wait on it, but we'll add Oklahoma into the mix there. I do lean to Virginia Tech, but I'm not going to play this one. But Florida State, I don't think is in a good spot. They just played Virginia kind of tough, but Virginia was way ahead of them, like by 10 with a few minutes to go. And Florida State kind of made a late comeback that was too late, but it kind of made the score a bit cosmetic there at the end. And they do have Duke up next, so it's a little bit of a sandwich-looking spot for Florida State, but I don't think it's really good enough to play this one. But they're at Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, they're coming off a real ugly loss to Notre Dame, though, so I would expect Virginia Tech to bounce back here, even though they do have North Carolina up next. Losing to Notre Dame, who's at the bottom of the ACC, that's pretty unacceptable. And Virginia Tech did lose at Florida State already, which was a kind of close game. They lost by 3. That one was a fairly close game the whole way. It actually kind of changed hands. Virginia Tech was ahead for a lot of the first half of that game and then fell behind for most of the second half and lost. So I do lean to Virginia Tech in that one. That's up from 5 to 5.5, going through the 5.5 with juice, actually. So I do like that one kind of, but that one's a little bit off. I think that one will be off my board here. I like playing against the teams that are coming off like the toughest games. Even though I do like the fact that Virginia Tech's coming off a real embarrassment of a game there. So there is that aspect to it. Ken Palm looks like he has this game kind of around 5. So kind of in line with where the number is. So lean to Virginia Tech. I actually will play on Oklahoma against Baylor. And then the other games that I like here are going to be on, what do we got here? I'm looking to see, because I thought you actually, I'm not going to play it, but you do have another one of those situations, I'll just call it out, where you have a ranked team that's a road underdog against an unranked team, and that's Iowa State at Cincinnati. So that's one of those situations where Cincinnati is actually a home favorite, unranked against a ranked opponent. And those games have tended to be money. Cincinnati up from pick'em to 1.5. I just don't really see that much of a situation where I want to actually get there with it. And I do like Iowa State a lot as far as their defense is concerned. Ken Baum's got Iowa State winning this game by 1. So it's like a pick the winner situation. It's kind of right in line with where you'd expect it to be. But Iowa State's not really coming off anything that like crazy. They just beat TCU. The one thing about going to Cincinnati that I will say makes it kind of a difficult spot is that the Big 12 teams are not familiar with having to go to Cincinnati because they're a newcomer to the conference. So that does give Cincinnati a little bit of an advantage situationally kind of in that way. But the one thing that would really kind of keep me off of Cincinnati, though, is they just played Houston pretty tough. That was a game where Houston, one of the top teams in the country, Cincinnati made 2 big comebacks in that game. They were down, I think, double digits in the first half, came all the way back, took the lead early into the second half, and then lost that again, fell pretty far behind again by almost double digits again, I think, and then made another comeback near the end and got back to within like 3 points in the final couple minutes of the game. Maybe it was even closer than that, actually, at one point. I think it was within 2, actually, in the final couple minutes of the game. So Cincinnati at home took Houston almost to the wire. So that's the type of game that does take a lot out of you. So even though I think they will be focused again with another ranked team coming into their house in Iowa State, that's not really a situation where I want to be on Cincinnati when they're excuse me, I'm falling out of my chair, where they're coming off such a crazy game against Houston. It's a little bit tough. So I don't want to quite get there with Cincinnati. So I do like the Oklahoma one. Let me see, because they're coming off, that like escape. So I like teams that are like pretty decent teams that are coming off escapes like that against Baylor. Ribeiro's coming off like a pretty tough game and deflating loss against Kansas. So I do like that one. The other 2 games that I like, let's just get to it. I like Providence minus 1.5. Providence, they're up from a pick'em to 1.5, so it looks like the line's moving in my direction. I don't see the percentages on any of these yet, but if you look at what's going on with that one, I don't think it's a good spot for St. John's. That's the main thing here. I think it's a little bit of a sandwich for St. John's. St. John's just went to Marquette, and they almost beat Marquette. They had a huge lead in the game against Marquette. They were blowing the doors off of Marquette early in the game. This was back, I think, what was this, on Saturday? So this was only a few days ago. They had a 15-point lead in the first half, led for almost the entire first half, let the lead kind of slip away, and then it kind of got real close, and they were still maintaining the lead by a few with like 10 minutes to go, fell a little bit behind, and then they really just tailed off at the end. A lot of the points at the end, I think, were just Marquette putting up like some free throw attempts at the end, and it looks like Kolek actually kind of rubbed salt in the wound by hitting a 3 there, although I guess it was with 36 seconds left, so I guess he wasn't like really totally running up the score. I guess you either take the shot or you don't even try to score at all there. So I guess that one, I don't know. We can let that one slide, I guess, a little bit. But St. John's, they had the lead for so much of that game. And then the game was really close. They were still within, like, I think 3 or 4 points in the final, like, couple minutes of the game. So the game was still pretty close. That's a tough game. That's got to take a lot out of St. John's against team that's ranked in the top 10 and second in the Big East, Marquette. That was a big game for St. John's. Playing Marquette really close. Now they have a second straight road game having to go to Providence, who they already beat at home, although it was a game where St. John's was a 7.5-point favorite, and they wound up only winning by 2. But if you look at what happened in that game, it wasn't really that close. St. John's was still up like pretty comfortably, like 6 points in the final like minute or something. And I think they kind of just took their foot off the gas just a little bit because they blew out Providence for most of that game. Like St. John's started the game on a 20-5 run. They were up double digits almost the entire first half into the second half, and they were still up double digits pretty late in the game, like in the final like 8 minutes or so of the game, still up double digits. And Providence tried to make like a late comeback, which obviously wasn't going to get there. So that game was not as close as the final score. Look, St. John's did outplay them quite a bit in that game, I would say. At least I had the lead for a lot of it. So I think it sets up kind of a revenge motive for Providence. I don't think St. John's is going to be in the mindset, well, Providence almost beat us on our own floor, because that wasn't really the case. St. John's really dominated them for most of that game. So it's a tough spot for St. John's, man. So I think the motivation is going to be on the Providence side, wanting a little bit of in-season revenge there, having lost and not played well at St. John's. St. John's coming off the really tough game against Marquette. And why did I say it's a sandwich spot? Well, they have Seton Hall up next. Seton Hall has not played well, really, even though Seton Hall is still fourth in the Big East. So that does kind of set it up for being a bigger game than this game against Providence here, even though Providence is actually tied or actually slightly ahead of St. John's in the conference, which is kind of crazy to think about. But Seton Hall ahead of them in the conference. Seton Hall's kind of fading fast, though, and kind of like falling like out of tournament favor almost. So that is, I think, going to be a big game just because Seton Hall's still like one of the better teams in the Big East, even though Seton Hall, is kind of fading from the tournament perspective here and is in trouble now as far as like making the tournament, where it looked like they were kind of a sure thing to make the tournament. That's not the case anymore. But I think it's a big game for St. John's because Seton Hall blew them out on the road at Seton Hall. Seton Hall absolutely annihilated St. John's. It was an embarrassing performance from St. John's. Somehow St. John's lost that, even though St. John's actually outshot them from the floor from a field goal perspective. They got absolutely dominated on the boards, and Seton Hall absolutely smacked them. The game was just a blowout almost the whole way. So I think St. John's is going to remember that. I think that's going to motivate them in the game against Seton Hall because they got blown out so hard. So that game is up next. This is a second straight road game, and they're coming off that tough game against Marquette. I think that does make it a sandwich spot here. I like the spot better for Providence. The line looks like it's moving in my direction. I think KenPom, he has these two teams. He does have St. John's ahead of them, but by how much, I'm not sure. Let me see. He's got St. John's down to 43rd, Providence 55th, and he has Providence by 1 here. So I think that makes this a decent play. Like the power ratings seem to be kind of in alignment with it as well. And Providence, they're not really coming off a great game. They had just beaten Creighton, which was a huge win, and then they went on the road and kind of suffered the letdown at Butler. I mentioned I liked Butler in that game. Butler did have a big lead for much of that game, but then Providence wound up taking the lead and having a pretty decent-sized lead in the late portions of the game, actually making a big comeback against Butler as an underdog. Butler was a 5.5-point favorite, but then still lost in the end. So you might say, well, that was kind of a tough game for Providence. Yeah, a little bit, but I think you're going to be motivated with St. John's coming to your house. And I think Providence might be a little bit upset after blowing that lead because I don't think they consider Butler to be that great a team, even though Butler is kind of moving onto the tournament bubble now and is now fifth in the Big East now. I still think it sets up a better situation for Providence, I would say, because they did ultimately lose that game. And it wasn't, even though it was a tough battle, it wasn't as tough as a game against Marquette is. It's not going to be a game that like hangs you over into the next game as much as a close call against Marquette would, which is what St. John's is in. So I like Providence here. Providence kind of blew that game. They were handling Butler, Providence was getting handled by Butler in that game. Came back, and then they blew it in the late portions of that game. They completely flipped it around, played a really good second half, and had the lead, and then still wound up losing it in the end. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes it a little bit of a tough spot for Providence. I think it's a way tougher spot for St. John's. So I think it is a sandwich spot, and it is a little bit of revenge for Providence for how poorly they played at St. John's. They're going to want to show up for this one, I would have to imagine, even though they are coming off kind of a tough game against against Butler there. So I like Providence, and then probably what I think is the worst situation on the entire board is a situation that Texas A&M is in. This is a situation where I just have to jump on it, dude. Texas A&M just completely blew out 6th-ranked Tennessee, who's one of the top 3 teams in the SEC. No disrespect to South Carolina, but I think South Carolina is being over-respected. I think the top 3 teams in the SEC are Alabama, Auburn, and Tennessee. I think they're all in the upper echelon of teams, even in the entire country. I think those 3 teams are all great teams. Even on the national level, those are 3 top 10 teams all in the SEC there. In South Carolina, even though they're hanging out at the top of the SEC right now, I don't think they're as good as those other teams. Texas A&M beating Tennessee, that's a gigantic win, and they absolutely blew them out. They totally destroyed Tennessee. That is an insane win for Texas A&M. And then Now they have to go on the road to Vandy, who I don't think they're going to be paying any attention to. Vandy has one win in the conference. Vandy's terrible. They're just sitting almost at the bottom of the conference, only above Missouri at this point. I think they're going to completely overlook Vandy. And who do they have up next? Alabama, who is ranked 15th, and they're second in the SEC, and they are one of the top teams in the country. So Texas A&M, they're not only a gigantic letdown spot, but with Alabama up next in 4 days, that makes this a sandwich spot. Having to go on the road to Vandy. Vandy is always kind of a weird place to play, with that weird like floor where the students are kind of just like sitting there like kind of close to the floor, and the floor is like raised up a little bit over where some of the students are. It's bizarre. Vandy's coming off another loss at South Carolina. I can't really blame them for that, obviously. Even though I said South Carolina is overrated, it's still not an easy task to go into South Carolina and win, especially when you're a terrible Vandy team. And Vandy's only win in the conference is against Missouri, but they've faced a gauntlet, man. I mean, the only like team that they've faced besides Missouri who isn't really that good in the SEC is LSU. So I don't think they've faced Georgia or Arkansas yet. So they've faced like all the best teams in the conference. So that makes their record a little bit worse too. I think they're going to show up for a game at home where they have Texas A&M coming in. I mean, you can't really not show up when you're a 1-9 team in the SEC, a 6-17 team. You're going to want to get a win against anybody really. Texas A&M in the kind of like maybe I guess in the upper half of the SEC there in Texas A&M, it's all about fading A&M. The spot that they're in is just unbelievably bad. They got to be in one of the most monster letdown spots that you can see. They're down from 10 to 9, though. I think you can find this at 9 in most places. I still like it at the 9, even though I think Ken Palm does kind of have this in the 10 range, I believe. Yeah, he does. But this is just such a bad spot. A huge, huge sandwich spot. So I like this one. I like Vandy. Moving over to the NBA, not that much to really choose from in the NBA. And this is one where it looks like the market is kind of against me right now, according to pregame. But the situation I really don't think is good. And the line is moving in my direction a little bit. I'm going to go back to the team that has treated me so awfully, and I've lost on them in their last 2 home games. This is the definition of insanity, man. Maybe I'm going completely insane, but I'm taking the Portland Trailblazers again at home. Something's got to give, man. Coming off 2 losses like that, I mean, come on, man. Portland Trailblazers, they're facing the T-Wolves. The T-Wolves down from 9 to 8.5 now on the road. I think you can find the 8.5s. They're plentiful out there. I think there's not much of a difference between 9 and 8.5. Minnesota, they can't do that much wrong. Everybody knows Minnesota is one of the top teams in basketball. Nobody's going to want to fade Minnesota here, but they're in a bad spot, dude. They're playing a 4th straight road game since last Tuesday. So they did have some days off before they play their previous game against the LA Clippers, but even so, they're on a back-to-back, and when you're on a back-to-back, you tend to put a lot more focus into one of the 2 games, and I'm pretty sure that was last night, because they went into the LA Clippers house and they beat them by 21 points, beat them 121-100. That's a gigantic win, and that was coming on the heels of beating Milwaukee by 24 points on the road in the game before that, which was 4 days before that. So they actually had 3 days off coming into the game against LA. So they're not the most unrested team, but they're in a letdown spot, dude. They're coming off 2 gigantic wins, both on the road against Milwaukee and now the Clippers. And the Clippers game was last night. Are they really going to turn it around and put full focus on Portland? And they do play Portland again, and then the All-Star break happens. So the All-Star break is coming up. So a lot of these NBA teams are playing their final game before the All-Star break at this point. These 2 teams play each other twice here, but I think if you're Portland, you got to be focused. I mean, you're going to want to salvage something on this homestand. You haven't won yet on the homestand. First game back, I thought they were in a decent spot. They had a bunch of days off after losing to Denver a couple of times, and they blew a gigantic lead against Detroit, losing in overtime to Detroit, who's still like the worst team in the NBA. That's totally embarrassing. And then Portland, I thought was... Off of that, I thought they were in a decent spot to beat Detroit. Detroit was in an awful spot, coming off a 13.5-point upset of Sacramento, and Portland had them like completely blown out and still completely blew the game. So I don't know what was up with that. Then after that, like kind of embarrassment, they turned around and they played okay against New Orleans and still couldn't cover. Missed that by like 1 point, really. They reached a point where they were actually winning the game, I think, by 1 fairly late in the 3rd period. I had said I thought it was tied in the 4th. It was not quite tied in the 4th, but they were within I think maybe 2 points at one point in the fourth, or maybe 3 points in the fourth, something like that. That was as close as they got. But they then succumbed, even though they were really hanging out right near the number and probably could have covered that, almost covered that. I think they're still going to show up again, man. When you have Minnesota coming into your house, Minnesota has no rest, no time off, and at least Portland does have some time off after that. They have, 1 day of rest? They actually have 2 days of rest, and on a 4-game loss streak, I think that extra day of rest is going to help, man. It's going to help break that losing momentum a bit there. It'll help you refocus. I think they're going to be focused, and they have a big team like Minnesota coming in. They're getting a boatload of points at home here. Remember, this is a Portland team that did beat Milwaukee on January 31st and beat Philadelphia. We know Philadelphia is not the same team without Embiid, but even so, and then they didn't play that poorly in that second road game at Denver either. So this Portland hasn't really been playing that poorly in any of these games, really. Like, they had Detroit completely blown out, although it's still embarrassing to blow a huge lead and lose to them. And they didn't play that badly against New Orleans either. So they've been a bit competitive, and nobody's going to want them at all here. Everybody that plays this game is only going to want to play against Minnesota, especially after we saw Minnesota just beat the Clippers, one of the best teams in the NBA. But I think that puts them in a letdown spot. I don't think they're going to be fully focused on this one, this being the second of a back-to-back after a gigantic win in the first of the back-to-back. So even though it looks like we have 70% of the tickets and 63% of the cash on the Trailblazers, I don't believe that. I don't see how we could have that high a ticket percentage on the side of the Blazers here. I don't understand how the Blazers could possibly be a public team here. So I'm going to do it, though. I think it's a letdown spot for the side of Minnesota. And then finally going to the NHL, we'll have one play here, which maybe this one's a little dicey. This one I'm playing against a team that's in a back-to-back too, even though they didn't play a very good game last night. I'm going to fade Seattle. I just think this is a bad spot for Seattle. It's a much better rest spot for the Islanders, even though it's factoring into the line a little bit. The Islanders are moving up from minus 150 to minus 155. It looks like they're public as well, but they have 97% of tickets, 99% of the cash. I don't think those percentages are accurate. I just think we don't have enough information yet, but you can find them at minus 155 out there. But it looks like they're moving up further. You can actually find them at 150 as well. So we could actually jump on that and do that. Let me see here. So, but I do like the Islanders. Looks like the line might be moving their direction a little bit. And it's more that I don't like the situation that Seattle is in, but I kind of like the situation that the Islanders are in as well. Seattle, they're on a back-to-back, but they're in a bad spot, dude. They're in the middle of a road trip here. They're playing a back-to-back, a third game in 4 days, all in different cities, although it's all been cities that are kind of close to each other in Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York. So not that much travel, but still having to go into all these different venues on that short notice. That's not good. And yeah, they haven't won a game on the road trip yet. So you're thinking, well, maybe they're going to want to be focused and pick up a game on the road trip. That's true. But I mean, they played last night and they have no time off now and have to go into the Islanders' house. And they do have Boston up next in 2 days. So will they be looking ahead at all to Boston? I don't know if you're going to be looking ahead if you just haven't won any games recently, but I don't know, man, because Boston looming on the horizon, that is a pretty big game. And Islanders, maybe not as intimidating as an opponent here. But the Islanders have had 2 days off, so their rest spot is much better, and they haven't traveled at all. So they have a big advantage there with the rest and travel situation. They haven't been traveling at all. They're not in the middle of a road trip here. They're in the middle of a homestand, and they have 2 days off, and they lost their previous game embarrassingly to the Calgary Flames 5-2. So they're going to want to bounce back from that. When you lose 5-2 to anybody, that's a pretty embarrassing loss there. And that was coming on the heels of a couple of big wins or big games, really, where they played Florida to overtime and lost. Although actually that one was before the All-Star break. Never mind, excuse me. But then coming out of the All-Star break, they went to Toronto and won, came back home, beat Tampa, who's not that bad a team, but beat them in dominant fashion, really, 6-2. Then they lost to Calgary, very ugly, losing 5-2, but I think they're going to be focused here just because they're coming off such an embarrassing loss. And their next game isn't until Sunday in 5 days, although it is one of those kind of weird isolated games. It's the Navy Federal Credit Union Stadium series. So that one, I don't know what is up with that one. That's Rangers Islanders, but I think it's going to be being played in East Rutherford at the Jets and Giants Stadium there. Whatever the name of that stadium is, it MetLife? I forget what it is. Whatever the name of that stadium is, that's a weird one. That might kind of be like a Winter Classic type of thing. It's not called the Winter Classic, but I think it's like an outdoor hockey game there, I believe. in the middle of the winter, still, of course, in New York or in New Jersey. So that's kind of weird. That's going to be one of those weird TV games. So will they be looking at Seattle's playing in that one, and they played in the Winter Classic? That's just bizarre. I don't even know. So Seattle does have that coming up on the horizon too. Or excuse me, no. Excuse me, that's Islanders Rangers. What am I saying? Islanders Rangers. I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, Islanders Rangers. So Islanders have that one coming up, but it's not for 5 days. And because they're coming off such a bad loss, I think they're going to be focused on this game here. Seattle with no time off and a terrible rest spot, even though they're looking to salvage something, and they're sitting at 21, 21, and 10 now. So they are going to maybe be motivated to try to get that win. I just think the rest spot is just terrible here, man. And they have Boston up next. So I don't like the spot for Seattle. So I'll lay the price with the Islanders here. I think the Islanders are in a much better spot to bounce back. That's going to do it for me, man. So those plays again, college basketball, Providence -1.5, Vanderbilt +9, Oklahoma +6.5, or maybe it'll even creep up further than that. Liking the situation on that one. NBA, Portland Trailblazers, please help me, +8.5, and New York Islanders in hockey -150. We got to start turning this around, man. Come on. That's going to do it for me. I'm toad. We're mired in this loss streak. At least the last couple of days have just been small losses, which are we're kind of more back into like the ordinary type of situation where I'm not just losing everything. But we got to start going on a run to get back to where we were before, and then once we do that, we can get back on the winning side of the year, which I expect is going to happen, but it's got to happen sooner than later, man. Let's make it happen. Have a good one. Peace.